Good evening, ladies and gents. This is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another 9th Age battle report. This is game 2 of our 5-part mini-series campaign between the Empire of Sonnstahl and Dread Elves. So the campaign is the Bloodstone of Levana. Duke Peter Whitestone's fingers shook with a slight tremor as he read the note from Captain Rowe of the Grey Company from the outpost on the border of the wastelands. He had said a force of Dread Elves had taken over the outpost. The devil women had come for revenge. He quickly sent a raven to Edward Talbot, apprentice to John D. Wilde, who since his return to the Empire 7 years ago had spent his time trying to unravel the mysteries of the artifact brought with them that cursed the land. It was a stone of large size, roughly cut, and dark blood red. John D. Wilde had said it was the key to everything, but since his death in the cursed land, he had never been able to unlock its mysteries. He had moved the stone and the apprentice out of the city to the capital for safety. He did not want to think what would happen if those vile creatures got their hands on the stone within the Empire. "Sir, an unknown army approaches," a runner pronounced. So as I said, this is game 2 of our 5-part mini-series. So in this battle, the Dread Elves are seeking for the Bloodstone. So here we can see across the battlefield, it is a attacker-defender scenario. The Empire was automatically designated as the defender. The Dread Elves will automatically be assigned as the attacker. You can see on the Dread Elf side, we have a hill on the top left. We have a forest in the center and a small rock on the far right. In the center of the board, we have, on the center left, we have a field. And then on the Empire side, we have 3 buildings. So each of these buildings is given a face-down token, one of which has the Bloodstone, while the other 2 are given false keys. And so the Dread Elf has to bring either a character or a unit into base contact with the building, and during the melee phase, they can search the building for the stone. If they have a unit or character that has claimed the stone at the end of the game, they win. So here are the 3 tokens. This is the face upside, so you can see that they are all more or less identical, except for one that has the red dot that is designated by the Bloodstone. And on the reverse side, they look like a golden shilling. So if we look at Duke Peter Whitestone's force, on my right flank, I placed my Black Knaves, which is a group of 9 knightly order, with Hugh of Lagany, which is a priest. To the left of them, I have the Black Crows. With them is Edward Talbot, who is a master in alchemy. To the left of them, I have the Ironclad 8th, which is a block of heavy infantry. And then in the center of my lines, I have Mons Meg, which is a great cannon. Next to them, I have the Steadfast 6th, which is a group of halberdiers with full command. And with them is Henry Campbell, which is my BSB for this scenario. And then on my left flank, I have my Heavy Dragoons, which is a unit of 10 knightly order. Behind them, I have 3 war elephants with Duke Peter Whitestone on an elephant as well. And on the far left, I have a group of 10 gunmen, known as the Green Caps. And then finally, a group of 6 riders there on my far left. On my opponent's right flank, there is a group of warlocks with the upgraded champion. On top of the hill, there is a group of repeater auxiliary. And then just off the hill in the center is a large block of temple militants. With them is a wizard apprentice. So the scenario for this particular battle, my opponent could not take a wizard master until they claim the stone. So if they don't claim the stone at the end of this battle, then they would not be able to take a wizard master next game either. If they do manage to capture the stone, then they can take a wizard master for the rest of the scenarios. In the center of my opponent's line, there is a block of legionnaires, and then a group of 10 black cloaks hiding in the forest. Behind them is Ilaria, who is a beast master, who is the general for my opponent's army. And then on my opponent's left flank, there is a group of a thunder pack of 3 creatures, a second block of legionnaires, a group of 3 Medusae, and a block of Dread Knights, and with them is the BSB. So the attacker went first, so turn 1, Dread Elves. So here in the center, my opponent moved up with the Legionnaires and kind of flip-flopped with the Thunder Pack and the Warlocks. Here on my opponent's left flank, they moved up cautiously. The Medusae moved up a little bit more aggressively, but everything else moved out fairly, cautiously. In shooting, my opponent managed to kill all 6 of my riders in the first volley of crossbow fire, so that hurt. And then that brings us to the Empire of Sonnstahl. So on the right, I moved up my 1 block of knights, moved up my heavy infantry, and then on my left flank, moved up my 2nd unit of knights and my 6th infantry, with my general and the war elephants coming up behind them. In magic and shooting, it was fairly uneventful. A little bit of shooting here and there, but nothing of note. So that brings us to turn 2. So in turn 2, my opponent charged the Medusae and the general on the mana core into my Steadfast 8th, and unlike the name suggests, they fled from the terror-causing mana core and ran away. You can see them here. And then on the right flank, you can see my opponent kind of shifted over the auxiliary and brought the Thunder Pack back around. Didn't move up too aggressively for the most part, kind of stayed back, which worked in my favor as I'm trying to keep my opponent away from the 3 buildings. So on my turn, I countercharged. I charged with my halberdiers into my opponent's general, who fled, as you can see here. And then I redirected into the black cloaks, which also fled, as you can see here. I charged my knights into the Dread Legionnaires. It was like a 10-inch charge, I think. No, you can see actually on the dice it was a 9-inch charge, and I failed to make that charge. And of course my halberdiers also failed their charge. On the right-hand side, I brought my knights up so that they will technically in charge distance, but I think my opponent would have to roll an 11 or 12. I just kind of wanted to threaten my opponent and keep them at bay without giving them a chance to really come forward. But luckily I did manage to rally my my Imperial Guard there in the center so that they are no longer fleeing. This is just another picture. You can see that my elephants are moving up, but because of all my failed charges, they kind of haven't been able to clear and get around. In Magic Phase, I get off a few spells. I make my opponent's Medusae flammable. You can see that my opponent got off Twisted Effigy on my cannon, so it was unable to shoot last turn, or this turn. So that brings us to turn 3. So far, not a whole lot of action yet. We've just kind of been moving our troops around. So my opponent declared a charge with the Medusae into my Imperial Guard, who stood, and then charged the knights into my knights. I was actually looking forward to this because I figured my opponent would fail because it was like an 11-inch charge, and then I'd be able to countercharge, and knights on the charge can usually do some damage. Over here on my opponent's right flank, they rallied the general and the black cloaks, and then kind of moved the Thunder Pack around. So over here on the left flank, the Medusae made it in, which I expected, but the knights managed to make the 11-inch charge into my knights. So that's probably not going to go very well. I was really counting on that counter charge, and with this, those knights are probably just going to get eaten. So in combat with the Medusae, my Imperial Guard do pretty well. I think my opponent peels off about a rank, so he kills about 8 of them. But in return, I managed to kill both 2 Medusae and leave 1 left, slightly injured, I believe. But they are unbreakable. Or no, they might not be unbreakable, but they stood, so they didn't break. And then over here, yeah, it was pretty bad. My opponent, I think, killed 8 of my knights straight out. So then I had my prelate and my champion who struck back. did manage to kill 2 knights, but then I auto broke and fled off the board, and my opponent just pivoted. So on my half of the turn, I charged my knights into my opponent's thunder pack. It was only like a 6-inch charge, so should be fairly easy. I believe my halberdiers stood back. I wanted to potentially countercharge, and also kind of hold the line. I didn't want to move too far out with my halberdiers. All right, so unfortunately, my knights failed that 6-inch charge. I think I rolled like a 3 or a 2, so they stumbled forward very badly. So that unfortunately did not go the way I wanted it. In combat, my opponent's Medusae managed to kill a couple more Imperial Guard, and I think my opponent rolled like 5 up Aegis saves and took only 1 wound. So while I hit it a lot, I didn't manage to do very many wounds, and my opponent stuck around. So that brings us to turn 4. So unfortunately, my opponent charged the knights into my crossbowmen. I decided to stand and shoot. You can see last turn that I got Glory for Gold off on my crossbowmen and put Alchemist Fire on my opponent. So I had flaming rerolls. And I rolled really well for my stand and shooting and managed to kill all but the BSB who charged into the crossbowmen. So that went phenomenal. My shooting was quite good there. Over on my opponent's right flank, they charged the Thunder Pack into my knights, who I decided to flee past my war elephants. And then I think my opponent tried to charge the elephants, but they just kind of stumbled forward at that point. My opponent also charged the general on the Mana Core into my Imperial Guard to help out the Medusae. And then you can see just kind of more or less formed up the line with the Temple Militants and the 1 unit of Dread Legionnaires. So over here, I think I challenged out my opponent's general with my champion, and my champion got curb stomped. I was still unable to finish out the Medusae because, once again, either I couldn't hit the creature or, once again, my opponent rolled phenomenally on the Aegis save. My opponent killed, looks like 5 crossbowmen, but they were steadfast and managed to hold. So on my turn, I once more countercharged. I charged my War Elephants into my opponent's Thunder Pack and charged my Halberdiers into my opponent's Temple Militia. And my Elephants made it in, so that's good news. Finally managed to complete a charge. But my Halberdiers who couldn't make like an 8-inch charge, so they just kind of stumbled forward. Not doing very well on my charges. And to put injury to a failed charge, my knights failed to rally and continued to flee. So not doing well. Over here on the right flank, after combat, my opponent didn't break my steadfast, but I could not roll a leadership 7 check, so my crossbowmen fled, my opponent chased me, wiped them out, which also took out my wizard, and reformed so they were facing the building. So that brings us to turn 5. So I didn't mention, so my elephants managed to actually do some damage and basically wipe out the Thunder Pack before they really had a chance to go. I think my opponent might have done like 1 wound to one of my elephants. They broke, I overran to get out of charge arc, and you can see them here. So my opponent decided to charge in the Dread Legionnaires and the Temple Militia into my Halberdiers. So I decided to hold. I did manage to get a spell up on them last turn so that they did have a 3-up armor. You can see down below, my opponent also managed to wipe out my Imperial Guard last turn. I was able to put a 2nd wound on the Medusae and 2 wounds on the General, but unfortunately my opponent broke my steadfast and chased me down and wiped them out, so I've lost another block. My opponent managed to make both their charges, so that's unsurprising as they were fairly small charges. And then my opponent also, we didn't show it in the pictures, but they reformed their Medusae and General at the end of last turn after they caught my fleeing Temple Guard or Imperial Guard. So the Medusae charged to the building, and the General charged into my cannon. As well as you can see the BSB also charged into contact with the building on the far right. So now both of these buildings are in contact with an opponent's character or unit, so they will be able to search both of these buildings next turn, or later this turn. So my opponent General easily managed to wipe out my cannon. Not a surprise there. They searched both of the buildings. So the Medusae searched the building in the center and turned up no luck, no stone. My opponent's BSB searched the building on the far right and did manage to find the stone. So I had hidden the stone on the far right building. In combat with the Halberdiers, it was pretty bloody. You can see I lost probably about 16 or so Halberdiers, potentially more. In return, I wiped out, looks like about 5 Temple Militants and about 5 Dread Legionnaires. Unfortunately, because the Dread Legionnaires are Academy trained, they count as having 1 additional rank, so they broke my Steadfast and broke me in combat, and then my opponent pursued me and managed to wipe out my Halberdier unit as well. So that brought us to turn 6. Things weren't looking too good for the Empire at this time. My opponent chaffed my elephants with their warlocks, so I charged and wiped out the warlocks and got a few points there, but basically couldn't do anything else. My other knights did manage to finally rally down here on the bottom left with all my dead. So I do actually have 5 of those knights are alive. They were going to charge my opponent's crossbowmen, but my opponent shot them last turn and killed off 4 of them. So I only had 5 knights left, and I decided, since this is the last turn of the game, I was actually going to not charge and just conserve the points. So at the end of the game, I had 5 knights left. I had my green caps, which are just in the left of this picture. I had this far left building that was unsearched, but it unfortunately had a negative stone, so it didn't help me. And then I had my general and my war elephants, which were basically untouched. My opponent, on the other hand, had only lost their warlocks and the Medusae, or only 2 of the Medusae, so they actually didn't even lose all the Medusae, and the Dread Knights. So my opponent really hadn't taken that many casualties, and they had gotten the secondary objective. So as you probably could predict, it was a 0-20 in favor of my opponent. So it was a huge Dread Elf victory, Dread Elf massacre. So this will carry us on into the 3rd campaign. So my opponent managed to get the stone, so that means they will be able to take a Wizard Master for the next game. And that means that I will not be able to take the Dark Elf Heredity spell, which would have been my benefit had I kept the stone. So that was the end of this game. We will probably be playing the next game shortly in the coming weeks. So I look forward to that. If you guys have any questions or comments, please put those in the comment section below. And as always, game on.